This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Patrick Gulo.
I'm Sam Merciers.
I'm Tim Rosenberg.
And I'm Dave McDonald.
And this week we'll be talking about arts funding in Europe, Classify, which is the new app from Spotify, and the Genius Myth that was posted on New Music Box. Sam, tell us about the smoothie first, though.
This is the important news of the week. I really think the most important story.
Sam was really gunning for this story, and I think it should be heard.
Dave posted it as a joke with the SN Weekly hashtag on Twitter, which is the sort of secret way we've been using to capture stories for the week.
It's secret because it's public.
That's right.
No better place to hide.
Michael Tilson Thomas did a rendition of a Cage piece that requires blending up some things on stage and drinking it. And so Alex Ross tweeted a short story, but most hilariously with a picture of the instruments, if you will, the banana, apple, carrot, cucumber, and celery that are, to quote the author, hauntingly captured in a still life that's on the post at The Rest Is Noise, therestisnoise.com. So anyway, it's funny. It's not really news, but I thought it was really funny.
There it is in all its glory for those that are. This is why you pay extra for the video version of our podcast.
That's right.
So now that we've gotten that out of the way, there's a great story was it in the Guardian this week about young people, or it was actually a couple of weeks ago. Two stories together actually about exposing young people to new music and how they seem to be more open-minded than most adults in regard to new sounds. And in particular, there are a few interesting programs. One in particular called Face the Music.
This is the New York Times article.
This is the New York Times article, yes.
Yeah, and Face the Music this was held over from last week.
Yeah, we were going to talk about this last week, and we just ran out of time. But a great article in the New York Times. Face the Music is a new music ensemble made up of high school kids, which is just it's so crazy it just might work.
One of the composers that takes part in that is Phil Klein, who is a favorite composer of Jeff Dibbles, who is hopefully watching right now. Mm-hmm. Phil Klein, if I'm not mistaken, is the Boombox Christmas music composer guy. There we go.
On Silent Night.
There we go.
Performed in cities around the world every winter.
And friend of the show, Jeff Dibble, is world famous for hosting an annual. Although, I guess since he's in Florida now, no Unsilent Night this coming year. We'll see.
Why not? What's wrong with doing it in Florida?
Well, that doesn't... they have no snow in Florida, he says.
You don't need to have snow to do it. I don't think snow's part of the piece.
That's true.
So anyway,
I'm saying, it won't be near me the way it usually is.
Oh, okay.
I only care about myself, Rosenberg. Haven't you caught on?
I get it.
Have you guys ever done any programs working with new music and young kids before? I haven't. I think it's a really interesting project, though.
Yeah. So go ahead, Tim.
I performed a lot of new music for young students, and I can say that usually they're very, very receptive to these new sounds, that as the article says, and also my wife teaches at a younger level and frequently plays avant-garde music and new music for them, and they love it. It's their favorite examples of the class. So.
How does she set that up for them?
It's just some sort of listening thing they do. She's even used Barrio and things like that.
Wow.
And they're just very, very into it. They always love these new sounds and things they've never heard. So it's pretty cool. I don't know exactly how she sets it up for them, but it is part of her curriculum. She uses it every time.
Right. So I think one of the really interesting things, not just listening to the stuff, but in this particular instance, playing it, because so much of this music is not easy to play. and to find things that these students would be interested in and that they could play, I think would be really difficult. And they start with kind of more flexible things. It says in here that one of the first pieces that they put together was Terry Riley's In C, which is not a technical challenge as much as it is a cognitive challenge.
I think that's a great way to start. And what's it, Undercuffler Linda, is that her name?
So this is a different group. Or no, no, never mind. You're right.
Yeah, she notes that when the first time they did it, like it went really fast. Everybody banged their way, and probably everybody knows out there how this piece is put together. I have lots of different notated cells, if you will, and you work your way through them. So the first performance was very short, and then by the time now they're up to like 75 minutes. That's cool when you think that a group of little kids is willing to engage, and we've all seen performances of this piece, and they range from like sublime to completely ridiculous.
Well, they're not little kids. They're 13 to 18.
Well, still, with just the limited parameters that are set forth by that piece, to get in there and commit to it for 75 full minutes, I think is a good thing. A good initial training piece for how to give yourself over to something that may seem sort of inscrutable at first.
Yeah, I certainly could not have done that when I was 18.
Right.
Now, is this an ensemble or is it more of a workshop setting, would you say? Because I definitely get the feel that it's like a lab.
Well, I think it's kind of both. I mean, there are probably times when they do have the lab thing. The photo in this in the article, at the top of the article, has Nico Muley standing with the group, and there's a guy with bowed electric guitar, and there's somebody else over here with what appears to be maybe a slide whistle or a recorder of some kind. So I mean, there's clearly some workshop type stuff going on here, but I don't get the impression from reading about this that that's the primary thing. To me, it seems like it's actually a new music ensemble. And the article brings up a couple of other ensembles around the country that do similar things. The Contemporary Youth Orchestra in Cleveland sounds awesome as well. So it's a very cool thing.
Known as Classical, a teenage chamber group in San Francisco. That's a cool name.
Formerly known as Classical. That's a good name, yeah.
So this is run by a woman. I got her name wrong. It's Jenny Undercuffler. She's the ensemble director, and it takes place at the Kaufman Center in Manhattan, just so everybody knows. And it sounds like a cool program. The article, that was from a couple of weeks ago when we held it over. There's an article in The Guardian this week.
That's the one I was thinking of at the beginning.
Yeah, about, he's this guy, Alexei Petridis, was talking about the Off the Page Festival, and he took his daughter to it and found some pretty interesting things in the way she responded to pieces. And he prefaces it by saying that he himself does not like, strange, ugly music, broadly defined. And there's some examples of that kind of music in the piece, presumably being ones he wouldn't like some Ligeti and some Stockhausen, and but oddly enough, some of the more challenging works for him were the ones that his daughter didn't have any trouble with, and she kind of liked them. So just a couple of examples of how perhaps younger people are a little more open to adventurous sounds than those who are a little more set in their ways. The example the author uses is that when he was during his formative years as a young child, he listened to the Carpenters because of his parents, and since then he has an enduring love of the Carpenters that's quite irrational. So the suggestion is that we could get future artists at a young age addicted even to the idea of finding new sounds and not being sort of overwhelmed by music that, because of lots of different things, they can't engage with, which would be one of the problems that's always a constant thing with new music and audiences.
Well, if you think about the music that 13 to 18-year-olds normally listen to. Your typical 13 to 18-year-old, they're listening to the radio. And that music is not, the most easily digestible.
Really?
Well, yeah, really. It can be very dissonant.
I would ask you to justify that.
Especially in the rock genre. It's extremely dissonant, or not dissonant, but grating because of the effects they use on most guitars. And if you think of LMFAO, like, their dance track, it's wild in terms of, melodic and
I don't think LMFAO is really as adventurous as you seem to think they are.
They're not groundbreaking group of any sort. I'm just saying that compared to, what we think of as classical music in terms of Mozart and Beethoven, this stuff is much more harmonically and melodically advanced, I'll say, for lack of a better term. And it does not surprise me at all that children are, drawn to these new sounds that are not the boring old triads and harmonies that that classical music is typically known for.
Have a better term. You said, for lack of a better term, sonically complex.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that's much better.
Yeah, and to you, I think Tim's exactly right. It's not just dissonance. It's like a giant wall of sound coming at you, no matter if it's made of triads or what it's made out of, can be more than some people want to listen to. I think that the generalization I would say is that you don't have a lot of pop music on the radio that's got the clarity and simplicity of like a Buddy Holly or something like that. It's not like to listen to the radio is not a completely unintelligent activity. There's some stuff out there that they absolutely come across that is a challenge to parse out in your brain,
And these students do it day to day. And the other thing is that they like music that's exciting and that's different. And most of these kids who are into
different from what?
Different from anything they've heard before. That's the whole thing about indie rock and like once you discover a band, and everybody starts jumping on your band, like you got to go find a new band that nobody knows,
right.
because it's different. It sounds different, and that's
say
why
I hate that.
It's ridiculous, but that's the way it is.
So you're saying so you're saying that all the kids listen to the indie rock. But if all the kids did listen to the indie rock, then it wouldn't be indie rock.
Of course not.
This is starting to sound like an episode of Music is Hard.
This is starting to sound like an episode of Portlandia.
That's not that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that young people are much more receptive to these new sounds, so it should not be a shock to us that they're like, oh wow, there's a whole new music ensemble of children. Like, I think it's just for lack of imagination from teachers to take this to take on a project like this. So I have to commend this teacher for doing this. I think it's great.
Yeah.
To reach a point where we're having lessons like that for kids, you have to have enough grown-ups who like that music and care about that music enough also, which maybe we're reaching a point where that's going to start happening more and more, Well, as a case in point, Tim, you and Dave, you are now out there representing new music in the academic system. So it's on your shoulders. Her
That's
life
right.
is in your hands.
Yeah, I don't think my students usually like most of the stuff I play for them, though. My students are a little too old to. I think Tim, maybe you have a different experience, but once they're in college, it's pretty hard to convince them. At least maybe it's just that I'm teaching non-music majors who aren't interested in thinking very much about what they're listening to, but it's pretty difficult. One thing that I think is really cool, this article mentions something that I did not know about, I'd never heard before, a program called A Minute of Listening, which is actually an initiative of Sound and Music, a group that we'll talk about a little bit later in the show. That it's just a 60-second audio thing to listen to every day, and it's a computer thing. The article is kind of vague, and I don't know much about it. It says a computer app that is designed for children to just sit down and listen to something for 60 seconds, because children are so usually used to looking at things and watching things, but just to sit down and listen to something for 60 seconds is pretty interesting. And all kinds of things, it says, from field recordings of football crowds to the thought-provokingly titled Wind by 6 females, to modern composers, and some people. So a lot of really interesting stuff. That's a very interesting program. I might see if I can get it and use it. It sounds like.
Well, it sounds. Go ahead, Patrick.
I'd like to repeat what Jeff said in the chat, saying identity with kids today is not so closely tied to one kind of music the way it was when we were growing up.
That's what I was going to say. Thanks, Jeff.
So do you think, I mean, even for our age, I mean, at least, I mean, am I the youngest? Am I the youngest in this group?
I think so.
I think you are.
But you're the best looking, so it balances out.
So is that, like, even 26 years, you know, do you think that's enough time to be able to make a statement like that?
Like what?
I think so, absolutely. Think about the way the music business and the way people understand and use music has changed since you were 10.
I think so.
Absolutely.
So. And it's changed so quickly.
Jeff's point, he didn't exactly say it the way I was going to say it, but it's really the same thing. Today, you know, you grow up listening to more different kinds of music that are considered like the stuff you might hear just by listening to the radio. I think that's increased since I was a kid, you know.
Yeah.
So in other words, just listening to very, very different sounding things is a good exercise in and of itself, I think. But I was thinking that 60 seconds of listening thing would be a great exercise, because I don't know if you guys experience, well, I'm sure you have, where, well, as a composer, it's a little different performer. Like, you get a recording of your new whatever and you play it for your parents because they say they want to hear it, and then you play it for them and they listen for like 8 seconds and then they start talking to you.
Right.
So like 60 seconds is about as long as I think I could probably convince anybody to really listen to something. But if they'll give me just those 60 seconds, I think it could be a worthwhile endeavor, and really listen during those 60 seconds.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, I think. So speaking of that program, that comes from a larger program in the UK called Sound and Music. Actually, I think specifically in England, which is a relatively recently formed group that kind of brought together a bunch of other groups from the Arts Council of England together that are all involved in new music. And we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, mostly because we'll look stupid because we don't know what we're talking about, because we all live in the United States. But this is, Sam likened it a little bit to the merger just last year of a few different organizations to form today what's New Music USA. One of the interesting differences, though, is this is entirely, mostly government funded in England. And there was kind of a big to-do over the last week or two after an open letter was written by a composer, and I guess intended to be written on behalf of a lot of composers in this group, saying that they haven't done what they could be doing for the composers in England, and that they've kind of let some really important programs slide that involved presenting a lot of music to a lot of audiences. And he does give them credit, though, for things like perhaps this minute of listening project that we just talked about for educational programs, that they've done a lot of good work in educational programs. And of course, Sound and Music, this got picked up, and a lot of people have been talking about it, and so Sound and Music kind of was forced to respond publicly to it, and so they have a response, and you know, they do have, I think, some good defenses. First of all, there's a lot of changes that have had to occur in a relatively short period of time with a lot of different groups, but also they've had a lot of funding cut, so they've had to negotiate funding cuts as well. So I don't know, do you guys have anything you want to add to this?
I'll stay in the arts.
Yeah, well, you know, there are benefits to be had from centralized organization in the benefit of a group. But getting it that way is always tough, especially when there are already other stakeholders with name brands in the game, you know? Um, yeah, so I'm going to follow this and see if anything worth talking about happens. But, you know, like you said, Dave, we don't really know enough about to analyze it. I just thought people might be curious that, um, you know, Sound and Music is this new thing that's going on and it's government funded, and some people have a problem with it, but Sound and Music also has some people on their side. So I'm going to see what happens.
Right, and of course, as I said, there's a lot of not just in the United States, but of course Europe is having a terrible time of it economically as well, and in some countries it's particularly bad.
Right.
Obviously, England is not the worst worst off. There are much worse conditions in Spain and Italy, but. And those countries are having even worse cuts. The La Scala Opera House has a $9 million U.S. equivalent shortfall due to reductions in government subsidies for La Scala. So there's a lot of pretty serious cutbacks going on all over Europe.
Yeah, so this actually speaks directly to something we talk about all the time. We think that we've got it bad in the United States because we have to figure out ways to raise our own money way more than in Europe. Well, look what happens if, you know, the economy crashes. Well, your economy as a new music ensemble is crashing too. The second page of the article, they actually say that a lot of the groups are talking about or being encouraged by their boards to take on an American-style system of finance. So there's actually European groups that are reaching out to big donors.
Tim's shaking his head.
Yeah.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah.
Why?
Look, we need more Italian
work.
opera over here. We need the Italians, the actual real Italians, to come over here and do it, because having Americans sing in Italian isn't good enough. Because I love opera.
Yeah.
What is today?
Oh, I get it.
April something. There's something about April and not being serious about things. I
We're
can't
gonna do something about
put
that.
my finger on it. Yeah, we were, but it didn't happen.
Pick
but
of the week is Mozart this week, by the way.
yeah, pick of the week is Mozart. Actually, I was gonna say. The joke that I did come up with was that I was gonna say that the pick of the week was Billy Ray Cyrus, "Achy Breaky Heart." Clearly, that was not funny to anybody but me.
Song, Dave.
Anyway, Europe is going to have to figure out how to do it the way we do it. So, I don't know
Well,
if that's
so I don't know. One of the things that you can say that the way that Europe supports their arts is part of kind of a cultural difference between the U.S. and Europe, where in the U.S. the arts are this luxury thing,
entertainment
that's only for people that can afford it. And in Europe, they're seen as this really important part of their cultural heritage.
their identity.
Yeah, so something about their identity that is worth supporting as a group, as a whole, with everyone.
Right.
In the sense that who's the congressman that says that government is just the name for all the things that we decide to do as a society together? Anyway, so it's as though they have decided as a society together that the arts are worthy of support, and the U.S. thinks of it as a luxury thing. So, it's a problem in a lot of places, and as you point out, maybe the way arts are funded in other places is going to have to start to become a little bit more like the way arts are funded in the U.S. for better or for worse.
Maybe everybody's just going to have to figure out a new way to do it.
Right. Well, I mean, we went to talk. David Cutler of The Savvy Musician gave a talk at Michigan State University a couple of months ago that I went to, and one of the things that he was big on was making sure that people didn't just assume that any arts organization that they were a part of would have to be a nonprofit. He was very adamant that you should at least consider the possibility of making money not through grants but through actually giving value to people that they pay for in some way. So
what we need is a system whereby we can work and try to make money, but still beg the government for money. That's what would be the best.
I don't think that would be fair, though.
So anyway, Europe and the United States learning stuff from each other. Well, they might learn something from us, but based on the U.S. soccer team's inability to even qualify for the Olympics, and this is for Jeff Dibble out there, we obviously haven't learned anything about soccer.
Yeah, that's the under 23 team, though. You can't. They're not. Whatever.
So this week, Earl Scruggs, legendary banjo player and bluegrass pioneer, dies at 88. Not necessarily a new music item per se, but when a guy has been, making what can't be called anything else but American music for so long, it's worth a mention at least. And the inventor of the three-finger when you hear a banjo doing what you think a banjo does these days, it's because of this guy. So if you dig Bela Fleck, then you should thank Earl Scruggs because he taught Bela Fleck to do this thing.
To do this thing.
To do this thing, the three-finger thing.
Right. So that was a story that took us in a completely different direction. And here's another. Spotify, if you're not using any of these free streaming services, you should, because they're awesome for discovering music that you wouldn't otherwise discover and not have to pay for it, and it's totally legal. There are some ethical pitfalls, but what do you mean so far?
I'm just waiting for some legal.
All labels are being compensated. All these organizations have deals with record labels. So one of the big ones is Spotify, and Spotify recently, just a couple of months ago, started allowing Spotify apps. So Spotify itself is an app, and then you can have an app within Spotify. Kind of like Facebook, you have Facebook apps. You can have Spotify apps as well. And that's even more confusing because Spotify is also a part of Facebook. You can listen to Spotify with your Facebook account. Anyway, this new app in Spotify is called Classify, and it is an app designed to organize classical music in Spotify. Has anybody tried this but me? Am I the only one that's tried this?
I haven't heard about it until today.
You are the app expert, Dave.
Okay, well, I just became the app expert then. So here, if you're watching the video version, this is what it looks like. You have a bunch of recommended playlists, and the recommended playlists are kind of crappy. A lot of them most of them appear to be just albums. But things like the 50 greatest pieces of classical music, classical spring music, Deutsche Grammophon, which is not very exclusive.
What is it just a label? The name of the album is the label?
Well, it's not an album, it's a playlist. So I'm sure it's just an enormous list of all the DG stuff that's on Spotify.
So if you want to listen to Warhorse after Warhorse, it'll be all good recordings then.
Right. Classical chill out. Lang Lang, the best of Lang Lang.
Oh my god.
My personal favorite. The London Philharmonic plays the greatest video game music. The various artists, the 50 most essential, something is cut off, but the album art says something about opera. We have Yo-Yo Ma, the Bach cello suites, which, you can't argue with that, even though everybody, kind of knows them. Classical moods, joy. And then underneath that is a bunch of composers, and the composers all have these ridiculous busts of composers. The most current composer that I found in there was Stravinsky, which is so there are no living composers in this list. You can browse by era, which is interesting. You can browse by mood or instrument as well, I suppose. But they do one thing that I like that they do is they separate 20th century and contemporary. So 20th century is 1900 to 2000, and contemporary is 1975 to present.
That's nice.
Yeah. So it's contemporary, unfortunately though, includes the greatest video game music. So
it goes by recording date, not by the day the piece.
No, it goes
Written
by
or-
it goes by the piece.
Oh, okay.
I mean, because they've got Baroque.
Okay, I see.
They've got a lot of older stuff too. One thing that I think see, they got Ferneyhough here. That's cool. A lot of stuff here is very skewed toward the most accessible of contemporary music, which isn't a bad thing. It's just not, a representative sample. And the other bad thing is that there's still no music store online, no digital music store that has good metadata for classical music. It just doesn't exist. iTunes is okay, but you can't see the most critical iTunes stuff until you buy it and have it in your own collection. And everything else is terrible. The way the stuff is labeled on the Google Play Music Store is terrible. The way the stuff is labeled in the Amazon Music Store is terrible. There's not, as far as I know, and if there is something that's better, let us know. A good, well-labeled digital music store for classical music. Do you think so, Tim?
No, there's
Tim, I know
none.
Tim is super picky about his digital music.
I am, and there are none. I always have to get it and then fix it, and it stinks. But that's just life.
And then you
About a
fix
year
it, and
ago,
then it doesn't
Apple
get
was fine.
recognized as the same thing as everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I have a very strict labeling system. I've written about it on my blog, but every time I buy something, and that's kind of good for me because I always have to consider when I'm about to buy something. I say, do I want to go through all these ID3 tags? And if the answer is no, then I guess I didn't need that album that bad. So,
Also, Tim will only listen to lossless.
yes,
Formats.
only lossless audio.
We've already had I think I've already used the Princess and the Pea joke about Tim and his listening habits.
Yeah.
So, Princess and the Pea, blah, 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 funny conclusion. There we go.
I will take your word for it.
So, Dave, we're using technology to help us sort and find music. The University of Memphis, Institute for Intelligent Systems has wants to take it a little further.
I like where you're
They're,
going here.
We weren't going to talk about this story?
No, I said I like where you're going here.
The Auto Genius Project, they've already built one robot there that responds to verbal input. Their plan is to build a robot that looks lifelike and is able to basically redo Glenn Gould's Goldberg variations. And rather than just basically creating a machine that can sit down and push all the right buttons, like Tim, have you ever seen, I think it was a Japanese firm that did the robot sax that could do all the solo from Giant
Yeah.
Steps?
Plays giant
You know.
steps. Well,
It's a really
plays
wooden
Yeah.
giant
See,
steps.
that's what I'm saying. So it's a really wooden, he gets all the notes, but that's about all you can say for that robot.
Which version of Glenn Gould's Goldberg variation? 'Cause he
The
recorded
first-
They
it
talked
twice.
talked about 1955.
But the difference
85.
is
85
that
or nothing.
the robot is outfitted with all kinds of sensors that give it real time while it's doing the performance data that it uses to sort of create its on the spot performance practice that will basically make an interpretation of the piece that will be different in every time it's performed because it's different environmental input. They contain it. I mean, they don't get into a big discussion of how exactly, but somehow the original recording by Gould is sort of the mathematical box that they're going to hold the robot in. So that's its parameters, and then within those parameters, it's free to interpret in its performance.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Are we running out of people?
No, but
Okay.
I still think this would be totally awesome to go see.
It would be a spectacle.
A robotic guy playing the Goldberg variations in a way that's convincing.
So I like Tim. I like your question. Are we running out of people? I think that points to the frustration that a lot of composers have. Like, are we running out of composers? Why do we need to play the music of these dead people?
Right.
Good point. Very good point.
I mean, it's almost the same argument. That of course we have new people to write new music. We don't really need the old. We have new people to play this music. We don't need to invent ways of maintaining these old performances. Though at the same time, there are these kind of historically significant artifacts of performance that until now were lost, and I think it's interesting that we would be able to maintain them. Don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, you would totally go to listen to a concert of a robot playing like Glenn Gould, right?
I wouldn't. No.
You're full of it. Yes, you would.
No, I wouldn't. I've got Glenn Gould. I don't need a robot.
Well, think about it this way: like, how many ever hundreds of years ago it would have needed to be for this to be the case, when somebody came up with a recorder or a proto clarinet or whatever and said, here, this is how it works, and you blow this thing here and you push these buttons. Did somebody say, have we run out of singers? It's technology definitely having an impact on how music is going to be made and understood.
Well, I'm never against new instruments or new sounds in music. I think that's a different argument. The point is that I mean, it's a robot that plays an instrument that we already have. If it was a robot that like was a new sound in music, some sort of synthesizer robot, I guess, then I'd have a different reaction. It's just like, why do I need a robot to play like Glenn Gould? I mean, and I wouldn't go see it. I mean, but if Jeremy Dank was going to come around and play the Goldberg, then I would go see it because he's got a different voice, and I don't.
Speaking of which,
true,
if you check
but,
out NPR Music,
Yeah, I saw that.
he did a whole week-long thing of posts about the Goldberg generation.
Do you think that the first time the space shuttle got off the ground, they immediately flew it into outer space? No, they did some touch and goes. So you got guys who are computer geeks. This is the first step. But you just wait. What if the robot is able to play along in a jazz combo and play improvised solos? Would you go see that?
No.
I don't think so.
Why not? That would
Why
be
would I?
remarkable to see.
It would be a remarkable feat of engineering, but
And I dig
I
cool
don't know.
engineering.
I don't know if I'd pay a cover charge for that.
It would be so to me. This would be like an interesting way to have background music if you can't afford a real person.
Yeah,
And
But
by the
it
way,
shouldn't-
I point out that they've had this technology.
It shouldn't replace people. Why would you want a robot to? I mean, Sam. Why would you want a robot to play Giant Steps with you when you could have a person play Giant Steps with you?
It's not a question of what I want. I think that people are going to make robots that can do these things as a foregone conclusion. They're going to keep going, and you can either decide it's stupid and ignore it, or think it's interesting from a not an artistic musical standpoint, unless it gets to where it is. But it's certainly interesting from a technological standpoint. What if it gave someone the ability who had lost a hand to play saxophone again?
Yeah, that's a totally different thing, and that'd be amazing. But it's not. It's recreating a
Right now,
piano
that's what it's doing. Right now, that's what the technology's doing.
Why don't these people take all the energy they're spending on this piano playing robot and make my driverless car?
Because
Or make
they're
mechanical
robot
hands for
geeks.
people. Let's do that. I love mechanical hands idea. Let's stop building a robot to play Glenn Gould.
Hey, well,
Ridiculous.
on the dock, I warned that we were being taken over, and I suggested somebody go get Will Smith. So, Tim, I think you're on call. See if you can get Will Smith on the phone to save
All right.
us.
I, for one, welcome our new robot overlords.
We should mention we got this story off of An Overgrown Path, a great music blog by Bob Shingleton. Dave, Bob Shingleton.
Well played.
That's right.
Is that supposed to be insider knowledge? Do we just out him?
No.
No. So from
Sorry, Bob.
from one genius story to the next genius story.
So we don't need genius robots because geniuses are fake constructs, right?
That's exactly right. Dave Smooke has a two-part article that ran on New Music Box, where he takes to task sort of the whole idea of a musical genius and what that means to culture. Dave, I'm too close to this one. You go ahead.
Well, he's the idea of a genius is kind of a friendly thing, right? I think it's fun to think of this person with magical powers that can do things that normal people can't do, that can create this amazing, powerful, artistic object that we as mere mortals cannot create. But that's a myth, and one of the reasons I think this is important, and as David Smooke points out, is this demystifies the act of composing, that it's not something that and maybe this is kind of a composers think of this as a dangerous idea, like we need to be thought of as this special thing that not everybody can do, so therefore people will pay us to do it. But I think it's important for people to understand that composers are not like this romantic, capital R romantic notion, waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat with this idea that they have, and then they run to their feathered quill and write out the whole movement of the piano concerto that just struck them with sudden inspiration. That's not how music gets made. It's a long process of kind of whittling away at a big block of something. And I think part of getting rid of the idea of a genius is getting rid of the idea of composition as this magical, mystical, incomprehensible process. And that it's a way of separating composers from everybody else. And that I think we need to think of ourselves, and other people need to think of us as part of this same group.
Yes.
Is that?
I think there's he points out that the whole idea of a genius is something that we invented, Like, it's not like we witnessed the emergence of geniuses and said, we better start calling them geniuses because that's what they are, The title of genius is always applied retroactively, and it's kind of become the center of how academic music works in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? We center everything we do around the works of these geniuses. And I think David Smooke is hinting at the very least, to the detriment of music by composers that are actually living, and we could find profitable, something profitable in hunting that music down rather than focusing on the who we've decided to call genius. And he actually makes mention of Rob Deemer's list of female composers as an example.
As an example of what? Making genius?
Place to start for finding new music by composers that is good, but not for finding more geniuses.
Right.
That's the tail end of another really good point. As lead female correspondent on the show, I feel obligated to say that the whole idea of a genius traditionally is sort of male-based, The concept of a genius in music centers around great men in no uncertain terms. And so that in and of itself is sort of an exclusion for women composers, female composers. And, he names a whole bunch of names, of course. So, yeah, I agree. The whole idea of holding on to the idea of this person's a genius, and because of that, their work is something that should be studied above and beyond everything else, even though we don't have the ability to really understand it. It's a bunch of puck. We need to move past it.
I think it's important to recognize people who excelled at a particular thing, because of their great intellect. That doesn't mean that it should be the one topic or the one element that is studied above all other things. We study Mozart, and by all accounts, Mozart was a genius in terms of IQ level. But that doesn't mean that we also can't study other people. But I don't want to totally disband the notion that there are people who are just incredibly smart and incredibly talented with their minds that they can do things that other people can't do. So
Yes, I would agree with that, and we should keep studying those people. I just think that people that deserve that kind of attention, there's a lot more of them than is typically recognized. And the reason why there's so few that populate the things we study in a music program, as an example, but not just in organized education, just in our own education as musicians through our life. The reason why we're focused on Beethoven, Mozart, and all this is because a limit on the distribution of information. Who are these people? How many composers were Beethoven's contemporaries? And all this, we don't know that, but we have the ability to know it now. And we have the ability to know lots and lots of people, and not just the people whose scores were preserved and who so-and-so in such year took up as a cause, and because they were a faculty member at such and such university, this composer is now well known as a member of the canon. I'm not saying that's unfair or anything, but we can do better as intelligent, artistic humans.
You're absolutely right.
And as an example, I love doing this. If you pull up Beethoven Complete Symphonies on Amazon, there's 1,756 results. That's what I'm talking about. We can do better than 1,800 recordings of Beethoven's Complete Symphonies. That's just such a waste of a bunch of intelligent, talented musicians to have that many recordings of it. But, if they're making money on them, I guess it's not a waste, is it?
Yeah, that's capitalism.
Yeah.
So, should we move on to the pick of the week?
The pick of the week.
Thanks, Sam.
I know how much you like it when I do that, Dave.
I do. It's my favorite part of the episode. Our pick of the week this week actually comes from a guest that we had on about a month ago, Carrie Andrew.
Friend of the show.
Friend of the show, Carrie Andrew. When she was on the show and we asked her to pick a piece for the pick of the week, she picked a piece by Gabriel Prokofiev, who's a really interesting composer. Also, if you hadn't caught this work of his, wrote a very cool concerto for bass drum and orchestra. And if you're curious, there are videos on YouTube. But one of the things that she mentioned to us was she has a really cool, hip vocal ensemble called Juice, and it's a female vocal trio, and the stuff that they do is mostly a cappella. And we checked out
Juice Vocal.
At Juice Vocal on Twitter. We checked out their album Song Spin, and we really, really dug it. And so we thought we would share it with you as a pick of the week. This is it's just the most amazing thing, because when you think of classical singers, you don't think of the kinds of sounds that these ladies are making. It's all over the map. This album has a lot of transcriptions of folk tunes, which are very creative in and of themselves, and then a lot of pretty wild new sounds as well. Do you have anything?
Are we going to be listening to the one I wanted to listen to, Dave?
I don't see any reason why not. Do you want to talk about it?
Well, going off what you were saying, Tim is not a composer, but I think Tim will even have a feeling about this. When you hear this piece, try to imagine being at your university, talking to some singers, because you've got this piece that sounds like this, and you're trying to get it performed. And imagine how completely impossible that would be.
Just for context, maybe we should mention the translation of this title is The Three Wise Monkeys.
Ah.
Nothing seen, nothing heard, nothing spoken.
Our senior Asian correspondent.
So I suppose we should go ahead and listen to this bad boy. This is Juice Vocal Ensemble Song Spin. And Patrick, do you want to pronounce that title for me again?
It is... Let's see here. Sanbiki no Kachikoi Suru.
What Patrick said.
Hey, Dave?
Yeah.
Can you start it at around 1 minute 27 and run that through about 2:10? I think that's the perfect thing to...
All right.
Place to play.
Here we go.
Because I had vetted this last week. We didn't use it.
By request from Sam Merciers. So that's just an excerpt from Juice, their album Song Spin. We could have listened to a lot of different tracks on here. There are also, in addition to these original performances, there are several remixes later on the album as well, which is also something that was on the music that we listened to when Carrie was on the show. There were several remixes later on of the track that we listened to. So an interesting idea for an album. You guys have any?
That was not by them too. There was a composer we need to name on that piece, and
Right.
I can't find it right quick. Do you have it in your stuff, Dave?
I do not, because I played that from Google Music, which has crappy track tags.
Well, keep going, and I'll find the composer's name because we can't not mention the composer.
So
James, oh wait,
say what?
James Lindsay.
So the interesting thing here, and this is kind of what Sam was getting at earlier, if you brought this music to some singer, some classical singer that you know,
Yeah, James Lindsay.
they wouldn't do that.
James Lindsay.
James Lindsay is the composer.
Great job, James Lindsay.
Most singers, I don't think, would do that. They would tell you that that kind of singing is bad for their voice. It hurts the chords.
Right.
Right.
And if they hurt their chords, we won't have enough opera singers to do all the Italian opera we're importing from Italy.
Well, you could just use Classify and get the 50 greatest opera arias ever of all time ever.
There you go.
I don't think. Well, I mean, they may say that it would hurt their voice if they don't know what they're doing.
No, they just say that. I don't even think it's true.
Yeah, it's probably not. I mean, it's definitely not true. You can make those sounds. I didn't hear it that well over the Skype connection, but I think from what I heard, you can make those sounds in a healthy way that will not damage your voice. I thought it was a great piece, and yeah, I mean, yeah, you're not gonna get every like classical singer to sing that, but I think you'd be surprised at the risks some singers are willing to take on to try to do something interesting with their instrument, just like any other musician. I mean, these people go through music school just like you do, and a lot of them get very frustrated with the canon and the repertoire,
Right.
and want to try to make new sounds and push the envelope of music, just like the composers or me as a saxophonist. I think you might not get everybody, but you'd get a couple.
Well, those are some things actually. I didn't. Those weren't necessarily originally my thoughts. Those are some things that Carrie said when she was on the show. Some of the reactions that they get from vocalists, because Carrie is, I don't think she went to school to study voice. So, and I don't know how many of these people in this ensemble studied classical voice primarily when they were in school either.
Right. Well, I think it has to do with, I based on observation just from being a music student, it seems related to how much of a canon there is weighing them down. Now, Tim, you have the advantage. Well, I mean, I consider it an advantage, but, some people might consider it a hardship. But as an example, you are expected, more or less, to be able to do multiphonics and circular breathe and slap tongue and double tongue and all that kind of stuff as a quote, real saxophone player these days. And I don't think the same kind of demands are put on singers because they're too busy learning this, well, the biggest canon of any instrument in music school,
Yeah, it's true. They rarely get to extended techniques where the saxophone gets to that, but I think that's only by a numbers game, really. A great singer will get through the repertoire, get through the canon, and be interested in trying out new things with their instrument. I would think That's how I would approach it if I was a great singer, and I'm not. But
Well, that I think the juice piece also illustrates something else that like I'm maybe some singers spend too long perfecting the artifact sound. You know what I mean?
yeah.
To me, pop voices, if you're doing a kind of music that requires you to sing proper pitch, if you're singing proper pitch, then that's the only requirement. Everything else is just color. Tom York has a terrible voice by many standards that would be quoted by people who went to music school, but I like listening to him sing because he sings on pitch most of the time. And he's got an interesting sounding voice. Bjork is an example, you know, her voice shreds and is getting torn to pieces from years of overdoing it, screaming over synthesizers, I guess, in her case. And she says she really enjoys it because her voice is changing and creating new sounds. I'm not saying singers should go out and destroy their voices, but it's just so much time dedicated to the artifact sound. Get that before you do anything else. And there's so many more interesting sounds a voice can make.
It's true in saxophone too. I mean, I think it's true in many instruments.
Yeah.
That everybody's got the canonical sound that you have to be able to make before you're recognized as a performer in this space.
Right. But Albert Eiler was a genius.
Yeah, or you go to some of these premieres at the conference that that happened a couple of weeks ago, and I've heard I heard a premiere where the guy really didn't play any notes. It was a lot of instrument sounds and tonguing sounds, very quiet. I guess there were a few notes, but people walk out of there and they say, well, I mean, he can't even play the instrument. What is he doing? I'm like, did you hear what he did? He was incredible. Just because he didn't make a great sound with great vibrato, is not that he can't play. And these singers are killing it. I mean, these singers are amazing. So
Jeff wants to know what you're talking about.
I'm sorry, what?
Jeff Dybel in the chat room would like to know what piece you're talking about.
It was a piece by Georges Apragis, a really famous French. He's born somewhere else, Greek, but living in Paris composer right now.
I know I've heard that name before.
Yeah,
he's written saxophone music. He's a saxophone music guy.
No, he's a avant-garde theater guy who has written several pieces for saxophone, but is more famous for his theater pieces.
We'll have to have him as a pick of the week sometime.
Oh yeah, he's great music.
We don't have enough. We don't have enough representation of European composers here. We do mostly American composers because we're, xenophobes or something.
Jeff says that he's a fantastic composer and every piece sounds different. So I guess the lesson he's trying to get across is don't expect nothing but poop, squeak, slap, squeaky, every time you go see a piece by this guy. The pieces range in expressive mode.
Yeah.
No?
They do.
No.
Not true?
No, they absolutely do, and they're just he's got a sound that defines him. Like you know it when you hear it, but he's got a very large palette of sounds.
I think Jeff misheard me. He didn't understand that I was trying to agree with him.
All right, I think we should maybe wrap this one up.
Yes.
So thanks to everyone for joining us this week. We had a great time. Thank you, Tim, for filling in. This is kind of a last-minute thing for filling in. Nate just found out yesterday afternoon that he wasn't going to be able to make it on the show this week. So thank you so much for filling in.
No problem.
To read more about any of the topics that we've covered or to comment on the show, head on over to our website, soundnotion.tv/SN, and you can leave us a comment there. You can also connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. We're at SoundNotion. We're also each individually on Twitter, and we'd love to continue that conversation with you there. This show and all our shows are available for free in the iTunes store. So be sure to subscribe there and catch every episode. SoundNotion's introduction includes music by Patrick Gulo and video by Tyler Lepp. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next week.